So each week I provide an overview of the week's events in Ukraine, and I usually do it Sunday to Sunday. Here I'm doing it Monday to Monday. Now, on Saturday, a week ago, that is, everything changed. With Israel and Hamas attacking Israel and what was going on there, we got very distracted, and we need to keep our eye on the ball of what's going on in Ukraine. So while I have headlines interspersed between what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Ukraine, I want you to know that I'm not going to forget about Ukraine. Okay, here we are, Monday, October 9th. Russians hand captured weapons to Hamas to accuse Ukraine of selling them. Kind of a jerk move. It is very clever because if you can convince the rest of the world that the Ukrainians get these weapons and then they sell them off to the highest bidder because they're just corrupt, that's kind of a coup for propaganda, but it didn't happen. Russia is interested in the war in the Middle East. Of course, they're going to be the big recipients or the ones that are going to benefit the most because of what's happening here between Ukraine and Russia. Russians are going to benefit by the West taking its eye off the ball. The U.S. Army chief urges Congress to increase funding to meet the needs of Israel and Ukraine. So that was good. And it looks like these things may be tied together. We'll see how that plays out. Russia seeks to frame Ukraine with trophy Western weapons in Gaza, says Kyiv. And this was in the Kyiv Post. It was in Newsweek, or Kyiv Independent, rather. It was in Newsweek. It was in a number of other places. I did a whole video about this. Marjorie Taylor Greene then suggested that the weapons came from Ukraine in a Twitter. And it was also picked up by folks like Scott Ritter in Pravda and on and on. RT Medvedev says that Hamas is using these weapons given to Ukraine, and then you see Scott Ritter say that in RT, and First Post was saying, did Hamas weapons come from Ukraine or Afghanistan? I mean, it's just they create their narrative and then they amplify it as much as possible. Al Jazeera was saying that Western leaders are accused of hypocrisy over the response to Palestine and Ukraine. Now, Al Jazeera has been absolutely amazingly good research when it came to Ukraine. But when it comes to Hamas and Israel, they have a dog in the fight, and they're going to be very skewed toward Palestine. Zelensky urges unity as he draws parallels between the attack on Ukraine and Israel. Russia and China urge renewal of Middle East peace talks. Now, both Russia and China very early on came out and said, we're just for peace. Well, and then Russia's tune would change over the week where it would become something more like, well, you know, the problem really was that the U.S. kept pushing them away from this two-state solution. And if they just did this, like apologizing for that and saying, well, that's what we need to get to. Not talking about the egregious atrocities that actually happened the Saturday before last. Moscow blasts a U.S. approach to Israel-Palestine violence. That's what I was just talking about. Hamas threatens to execute hostages and broadcast it on TV. That's good. So it's what Hamas actually did was they went and filmed all their atrocities as if this was a good thing for the rest of the Muslim world to celebrate. And that's kind of, you know, the kind of way that they're thinking about what actually happened. And they're going to be filming again when the IDF comes in a few days and goes house to house or building to building or whatever. They're going to be filming it, looking to spin it any way that they can. So the Israelis have to be very careful not to overplay their hand. Okay, Zelensky replaced the Territorial Defense Forces commander, and I'm not sure what happened. I don't see any evidence of corruption necessarily, but that may very well be what was going on. I just don't know. But that they're doing it is a positive sign. That was on Monday. Here's the news for Tuesday, 10 October. Zelensky replaces the head of Poltava Regional Administration. Same kind of thing. I don't know that there was any wrongdoing or whatever, but I don't know why you would replace him unless there was some suspicion of something. Prishny denies info in the media about resignation letter he allegedly wrote. He was the head of the Bank of Ukraine, and he was working as part of the Ukrainian delegation at the annual meeting of the IMF, and he said, quote, I was surprised to learn that I allegedly wrote a letter of resignation from the post of NBU governor. Nothing more than a fake. So I don't know what's happening there, but that happened. The White House and lawmakers weigh linking Ukraine and Israel aid. And I think that would actually be very useful because there are people in either party that wants one or the other, and to put it together and make it one package would make sure that it goes through. Russia attempts and fails to return to the UN Human Rights Council. Now, that was gutsy, right? Russia won 83 votes versus 160 for Bulgaria and 123 for Albania in a secret ballot to return to the UN Human Rights Council, right? That they got 83 votes should have been a headline. What 83 countries are saying, you know, Russia, you're doing a good job with human rights. Yeah, that was pretty amazing to see. The Romanian president was talking about how the Black Sea must remain open, and sometimes we forget that it's not just Ukraine and Russia in the Black Sea, it's Turkey and Bulgaria and Romania and Georgia. There are these other states that are affected by what's going on. We also found out that the Finnish undersea pipeline was attacked. This goes from Finland to Estonia. And if that was attacked by Russia, that's really something, because Russia was talking about nuclear war when their pipeline was attacked. We'll see how NATO handles this as time goes on. Russia sets up fake private military company in Ukraine as Wagner's replacement. And I was reading about that. It was interesting, but not a lot that I want to go into right now. Germany announced a $1.1 billion in aid package, a new aid package for Ukraine. Good on you, Germany. Two former top officials of Ukraine Defense Ministry were suspected of embezzlement. Now, that's different than the other articles that I talked about before, about the people that were removed. This is actually suspected embezzlement, and they were removed. And so Ukraine is corrupt is a narrative, but they're actually doing something about rooting out corruption, and I think that's very important. Last article on Tuesday that was really important was Putin's political gamble could put Ukraine war at risk. And there's a quote in here I want to read. It is therefore highly unlikely that any further mobilization wave will be implemented before the March 2024 presidential election. British intelligence added. Okay, so Putin wants to get reelected, and he doesn't want to mobilize before that. But in April of 2024, I think it'll be back on. Okay, we'll see how that all plays out. Wednesday, 11 October 2023. Half of Ukrainians believe that Ukraine is headed in the right direction. This was a poll. 48.7% said that they were going the right direction. This is Ukrainian citizens. 30.5% of respondents had the opposite, so one-third, a little less than one-third, and about 20% were undecided. But if you think you're going the right direction in the conditions that they're in right now in Ukraine, that's pretty good. That's reflecting well on you, because they're pretty bad conditions with the Russians bombing and regularly hitting with rockets and missiles and all kinds of things. Zelensky intends to run again if elections take place during wartime. Now, if they take place during wartime, what does that mean? So apparently, constitutionally, they can't hold elections during wartime. They're getting pressure from the West to do that. They could change the rules to do that. He said this, and this was really interesting how he said it. If the war continues, yes. If the war ends, no. I cannot leave during the war. Does that mean that he's going to not run again if they establish peace? I don't fault him if he's worn out, but that's what it sounds like. Okay, another survey, 64% of those surveyed do not favor holding elections during the war. That's in Ukraine. Only 15% favored holding elections during the war. It's their country. I would urge that they do it, but that's me. NATO vows to respond if Finland-Estonia gas pipeline damage was deliberate. We'll see how that all plays out. I'm sure they'll be trying to figure it out. Russia and Saudi Arabia continue oil price pact despite Middle East crisis. Quote, Saudi Arabia and Russia agreed to withhold a combined 1.3 million barrels a day, or more than 1% of global demand, from the market until the end of the year, frustrating world leaders struggling against inflation. Putin said, quote, this is rich, listen to this. The actions of some of our colleagues, the Western elites, have sown confusion on the global energy market, including the oil market. The negative consequences of such politicized steps affect the entire global economy. Now it has to be corrected, and of course, responsible market participants have to do it. Like him, I suppose. Okay, the White House plans to put Ukraine, Taiwan, and border funding and Israel all into the same request, according to an article in NBC News. Zelensky at NATO headquarters in Austin announced another $200 million security package. Zelensky was actually physically at the NATO meeting, and that was big news. But you didn't see the massive bombing kind of things that happen. Usually there's this massive missile attack on Ukraine when that's going on. I think Putin was kind of happy that Israel was overshadowing that, so he didn't feel like he needed to steal the spotlight. The Israel conflagration opens a possible new path for U.S. aid to Ukraine, but there are pitfalls, according to a Radio Free Europe article. Quote, the White House is reportedly working with pro-Ukrainian members of Congress to link military aid with Israel funding for Ukraine and Taiwan, which faces potential threat of military action by China. Israel enjoys wide bipartisan support in Congress, so a package that included aid to both Israel and Ukraine would be almost certain to pass, experts say, unquote. And I think that's probably the course that they need to take. Pravda says that Putin said that Israel occupies ancient Palestinian lands, so he's one-siding it. And when he's not one-siding it, he's just trying to inflame it and keep it going. And then finally, another RT article, how a U.S. peace plan brought war to Israel's doorstep. They're blaming the Abraham Accords. Here, quote, the 2020 Abraham Accords were a time bomb that exploded in last week's Hamas assault. Okay, unquote. Now, the Abraham Accords were where Trump administration finally got the UAE and one other country to agree that Israel has a right to exist. That's it. That's what blew up. Okay, and Saudi Arabia was just around the corner from getting along with Israel as well, and I think that's what Hamas may have been trying to prevent, and by creating this catastrophe. Thursday, 12 October, enemy considering Avdiivka. I mispronounced that the other day, and people just went nuts about how I pronounce it. I pronounce all kinds of things wrong. I pronounce English words wrong. Avdiivka, as a chance to get a landmark victory, turn the tide in hostilities, throwing lots of infantry in there. They really were working at it, and they got hammered for it. I mean, it was just amazing over the last 5 or 7 days, something like that, watching what happened in Avdiivka. The Russians kept piling it in, and the Ukrainians were just blowing stuff up. And there was, if you look at the losses calculated by Ukraine, it went from like 300, 500 a day to like 800 and 1,000 a day. It was pretty amazing. Zelensky worries that Israel may distract the world's attention from him in Ukraine. That's correct. It's going to that's a Pravda article, but it's still right. I mean, distract from him, right? Look how they're saying it. But it is true. It is shifting, and we need to shift it back. Hamas attack exposes deteriorating ties between Russia and Israel, and that is also true. Netanyahu was slow to support Ukraine in an overt way because he was trying to prevent any deterioration between Russia and Israel. But here's a quote. Israel has always been careful to maintain a good relationship with Moscow, given Russia's large Jewish community and its influence over Syria. So for both of those reasons, I understand what Netanyahu was doing. It's unfortunate that he didn't do more, but now he's got his own problems that he has to support. And Zelensky came out and full-throatedly supported Israel. Okay, Friday the 13th, October 2023, Israel prepares to launch one of the largest humanitarian disasters in the 21st century, says Pravda. Well, of course, they're simply trying to get their people back. Okay, so right now, this was an article from Friday. Right now, as I'm talking, it's Tuesday morning, and there's still 199 hostages that Hamas has that we know of. So do they have a right to do this? Yes, they have to be careful not to overplay their hand, but they need to go get those people back. Putin warns of consequences during the Israeli ground operation in Gaza, says Pravda. Ukraine accuses Russia of using phosphorus in Avdiivka offensive, and quote, the assault on Avdiivka, seen as the largest Russian attack in the east since the start of Ukraine's counteroffensive several months ago, has reportedly involved some 2,000 troops, numerous armored vehicles, and air support. Well, I'm sure there's more than that. It's a pretty big operation, and there's a lot. Okay, Russia-Ukraine war alive. So Putin, this is in The Guardian, Putin dismisses allegations over a mystery Baltic pipeline damage. And so it's not us, but of course, if it was them, would they be saying it's them? So we'll find out what happens eventually. Defense forces eliminate 1,030 invaders over the day, say the general staff. This is Interfax Ukraine. So it went from like 300 to 500 a day Russian losses to over 1,000 on Thursday. Okay, what's going on in Avdiivka? A Russian offensive challenges Ukraine in the east. And this is a Radio Free Europe article, and it's just kind of explaining what's going on and how they're amassing these tanks and all the bad stuff that happened. Okay, Saturday, 14 October, fierce fighting persists in Ukraine's east as Kyiv reports non-stop assaults by Russia. Sappers, now this was fascinating. This was absolutely fascinating. Sappers discover over 707,000 explosive objects, says Klemenko. Okay, that's over a space of 587 square miles. They found 707,000 explosive objects. So, mines and other things along those lines. To put that in comparison, that's about half the size of Rhode Island, and that means that there is about 1,200 explosive objects that the sappers found per square mile of those 587 square miles, right? That's a lot of explosive objects, including mines. Okay, Ukraine updates. Russia says that drone attacks on Sochi were thwarted, and that was in DW, so it seems like a legitimate source. The U.S. said that North Korea delivered arms to Russia for the war in Ukraine. Looks like it really happened. We condemn the North Korea for providing Russia with its military equipment, which will be used to attack Ukrainian cities and kill Ukrainian civilians and further Russia's illegitimate war, said Kirby. We will continue to monitor for any additional North Korean arms shipments to Russia. They know that they're doing it. We know that they're doing it. They know that we know that they're doing it, and they're doing it. Okay. Politically, let's look at that. Hard-right Republicans are against Ukraine aid, and they seem to be in charge. Quote, and this is from The Guardian, the rising opposition to funding Ukraine among Republicans appears to be a direct response to Trump's approach to foreign policy. I would say that's probably fair, which has resonated deeply with the more isolationist faction of his party. That philosophy has frustrated establishment Republicans. I don't like the word establishment, but like conservative Republicans like me, who embrace the party's traditional vision of diplomacy, remembering the days of Ronald Reagan, using the country's military and economic might to fight communism abroad. Republicans once stood against communism and thugs like Vladimir Putin, but it's a shame that not every Republican is speaking out against what Russia is doing to Ukraine. Okay, I think that's a very fair assessment. Ukrainian pilots are to start operating F-16s next week, and there's going to be like different groups of them who are some that are experienced pilots that need certain amount of training and some that have less experience who need a lot more training, but they're going to start working them through starting next week, and that's great to see. Okay, Sunday, October 15th. The big news, again, was just Avdiivka. Okay, the offensive is failing, says a top Ukrainian officer. Russia continues the assault around Avdiivka in the largest of Ukraine's offensives in months, according to Radio Free Europe and The Guardian. That's the big focus. I'm trying to stay on Ukraine, but it's hard. Like, I have to address things in Israel along the way. Okay, Monday, October 23rd. Zelensky, this is day 600. Now think about that, day 600. 600 days of, it was supposed to take 3 weeks or 3 days to capture Kyiv and then 3 weeks. So we're in 28 special military operations later. Right? If you go by 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 weeks. Do not lose, this is Zelensky saying, do not lose unity. Destroy the invaders, Zelensky says on 600th day since the start of a large-scale war. Quote, the will that does not give up gains freedom. Freedom based on unity always prevails. The point is not to waste time, not to lose unity, not to let doubts corrode will. Every day we must add to Ukraine's strength. Every day we must destroy the occupier. And Zelensky, I mean, I read the first 4 months every day of his speeches when this started, and like he's fantastic with being able to communicate what is going on and why. Ukraine reports more than 50 clashes as it marks day 600. So, I mean, the Russians keep coming. Now, why do the Russians keep coming to Avdiivka? And part of it, and I understand this to be the case, but I don't know for 100% sure, but that Putin apparently said he wants the Russians to be at the borders of Donetsk by the end of the year, by December 31st. Okay, he can just order it, but why does he think that it's going to work now when it didn't work before this? Well, because he's hearing these crazy numbers, and I'm going to talk about the crazy numbers that he's hearing from his military commanders, and because of that, he thinks he can do better than he can. So here's another article. Putin hammers Ukraine while West is distracted by the Middle East. Another one, Putin says Ukraine's losses are 8 times larger than Russian ones. Well, he's hearing that from his commanders, who are hearing it from their sub-commanders, who are hearing them from the frontline commanders, who are probably inflating the numbers. That is my estimation of what's going on, because there's no way that it could be as high as that to my mind. Shogu estimates Ukrainian losses as 90,000+ Ukrainian losses since June. That seems kind of high, and again, I think there's an inflation involved. The elections in Poland were on Sunday, and they prove, here's the article in Pravda, elections in Poland prove the country follows a path of populism and chaos. So if RT is against it or Pravda is against it, it probably went well for Ukraine. You can just kind of use that as a kind of a rule of thumb. China woos the global south and embraces Putin at the Belt and Road Beijing summit, and he really did. Putin traveled outside of Russia to China, and China didn't do anything about arresting him. It's kind of snubbing the Hague, and they know what they're doing there. China and Russia harden their positions on Gaza as the war stirs geopolitical tensions. China's come down much harder on the Israel-Gaza thing than I thought that they would have. Usually they try to stay kind of neutral on this, but they've actually taken a pro-Gaza kind of position. Oh, what Israel is doing is disproportionate. They still have 199 hostages as I'm speaking right now. So is it disproportionate until you get your people back? I'm not sure that it is. Okay. That's the news. That's what I have for you right now. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being willing to listen to this. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.